So there is literally limitless, endless ways of creating melodies. And to show you this, I'm gonna create 10 melodies in 10 completely different ways today. This is gonna be a fun video, so let's jump in. Before I do though, I wanted to quickly mention all the cool free stuff that you can get on the EDMProd free downloads page. You know, we've got sample packs, we have starter kits, we even have this really cool social media release checklist. So if you're interested in any of this stuff, check out the downloads link below. So our first technique today is drawing the notes in, and what I actually like to do to make it a little bit more interesting than just simply drawing them in is to draw them in with context. So I've got this Rhodes chord progression in the background, right? And what I'm gonna do is draw some notes in with context, and then I'm gonna like sort of remove the context, and it will give this melody a life of its own afterwards. So I'm just doing something really basic, very simple. I'm not trying to make this sound too flashy, nothing too special. I'm just simply describing the technique here. So what I'm hearing here, right, this is an interesting concept, right? Because this chord progression is a little bit different. See how this chord actually starts here, which it's pushed. So instead of starting on the beat here, it starts here instead. Right? So what is happening here is my ear is telling me that instead of going down and resolving here, I should go down here instead. And it's sort of telling me that it's maybe like an A instead of an A sharp as well, which is an interesting note, right? So let's have a listen to this. And now this doesn't really work because this isn't resolving to it. So let's try and get some resolution to that note. Like something like this. Right? And then we can go and start building again. And so the secret here is, what I'm going to do is actually just remove this Rhodes chord progression. And I've got some drums and bass which I wrote over the Rhodes chord progression. And once I remove that chord progression, it takes this melody out of context and gives it a life of its own. So now I'm hearing this, I'm like, okay, I want to change this patch a little bit. Maybe I want to put some delay on. Around with some automation. We could even like remove some notes now. So technique one, write it in as per usual over a chord progression, then remove the chord progression and tweak away. So our next technique is actually playing them in. It's a bit more hands-on. You don't need a MIDI controller. You don't need to be good at it. We've got quantize. We've got all these things that allow us to do it no matter what. We've got no excuses. So what I'm going to do is actually just, I think I'm just going to pitch this thing down a little bit just to give us a bit of a different vibe. Give me a bit of different inspiration. Oh, yeah, nice. Oh, yeah. I'm going to loop this section. And then what I'm going to do is actually just find a few notes that I like before I start. So I like this one. That's the octave, right? So, yeah, okay, there's a few notes here that I like. Maybe. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes there, and then maybe I could play this one as well. So I'm just going to play those notes in kind of randomized different orders and just hit record and see how I go. So then I can go in here and clean things up, but you can see that this is a much more expressive technique that creates a different style of melody that's one that I'm sort of more feeling rather than just clicking around. So already, same chord progression, we've created two completely different styles by doing two different techniques. So playing around with arpeggiators is another really fun way of creating melodies, and actually just experimenting with melodies you've already created as well. So I've got a whole bunch of notes that I created earlier, and let's say I just like extend these notes out and sort of overlap some of these things together. I've got really no idea what is going to happen here, but the idea is just to experiment around and have fun with these tools, even if you don't necessarily know how to use them. So I've got this arpeggiator here. I'm just going to change sort of the style around. Maybe I change the gate around. I could maybe switch the notes around as well. So maybe put this down an octave. Change the rate maybe. There's a whole bunch of arpeggiator presets that you can experiment around with as well. And what is even really, really cool also is to stack multiple arpeggios together. So let's just see how this sounds. That's so interesting. It's a bit of a vibe though. I find it so interesting to see how multiple arpeggiators react together. They create some really cool melodic and rhythmic things that you wouldn't really think of, so definitely worth trying out. The next technique is a fun one. It's simply just scribbling on the piano roll with a pen and then sort of cleaning it up afterwards. And now with Ableton's scale feature, it actually makes this a whole bunch more musical. So I've just put this into scale of C minor, and then I'm just gonna like fold it to the scale and just sort of scribble around and see what happens. What I'm going to do is actually hold Option with the pen tool, and that will make it so it only makes one note per grid line. And then I'm just going to like, maybe I turn this off and then sort of just like experiment, just randomly draw around a few notes. And then let's just try and listen for any interesting melodic ideas that might have been created. So, okay, I'm going to take this delay off now. And then maybe we could work with this. So I've just cleaned a few things up now, and maybe we can just loop this over. So I'm just going to highlight this section, hit Command D. And as always, this is just a simple starting point. So there's so many things that we can do from here. So let's say I went and got a velocity device. I'm going to go grab a velocity device and grab this total random preset, and then just pull back the random amount a little bit. And I'm going to do some velocity mapping. So I've got a separate video just for velocity mapping, if you don't know what this is, but it's pretty much just mapping this randomness to pretty much anything. So I've got this velocity. I'm just going to map the velocity to the filter frequency, and I'm randomizing the velocity over here. So now check this out. So technique number 5 is extracting melodies from audio samples. So Ableton can do this. I'm just going to drag this into this little cell here. It's just a little melody. It sounds like this. Right. So let's just see what happens when I convert the melody to a new MIDI track. This is also going to give me an instrument with a bunch of macros, which I can sort of tweak the sound as well. Let's just see how this goes. I'm just going to hit stop here and play this one. It's done a pretty good job. right? So maybe I could, now that this is MIDI, tweak this. And now we can use a whole bunch of MIDI effects on this because now it's MIDI, remember? So maybe I could change something like note length. And now we have the limitless possibilities that come with MIDI and experimenting around with MIDI. You can see that the velocity here is all different, so we could maybe do some velocity mapping. There's just so much experimentation that can come about from converting audio tracks into MIDI tracks. The sixth technique here is using a sequencer. So I have this one loaded up from Max for Live called MDD Snake. And this one is fun because it's a really experimental device. So I can go into these gates and then just hit random here, and it'll just spit out a whole bunch of random sort of notes that it's going to trigger. And I also need some velocity. So, and then if we want things to be different notes, then you can hit random here, or I can actually just define a little range. I want these to be low notes and then randomize these ones. So that's interesting. Maybe I can sort of experiment around with these ones, or even change the gate a bit more. Keep randomizing. And so what I can do is change these snake shapes as well. So I can just change the way it moves and scans around these. I can also go over to this quantizer if it's a bit too random and sort of just select the notes that I want. So maybe something like this. Something like this, and then just keep playing around. Maybe play around with the speed even. So just sort of trying to find something I like in terms of the rhythm here. Oh, that's nice. Okay, this kind of works. So I've got this, now I've got this drum beat here as well, right? So we've got this vibe. Ooh. So you can see that using sequences is a really fun way of having like a lot of controlled randomness around programming your melodies. So we have this little melody from before, right? And I'm just gonna go grab a synth lead preset this time. Something that I want a little bit of a glide to. And so what we can do, this is a fun way of doing things, because when you drag out the length of the notes, when you have the glide enabled, right, it gives it a different feel, but it also makes programming melodies different as well. So I can sort of just experiment around. Maybe I can put my scale back on and then sort of just experiment around hitting a few notes and sort of see what it does. Maybe I'm just gonna bring the filter down a bit. And then sort of just shorten some of these things and see if I can make some sort of progression even. So because I've just lengthened out the notes here and I'm using a patch that has, some glide and some legato to it, and it's mono, like a lead patch, this is just making me sort of perceive the melody writing process in a little bit of a different way again. Our next technique is rhythm first melodies. So like not even worrying about what the notes are doing, what the actual melodic content is doing, and then just focusing on the rhythm and then doing the notes later. So this is really good for designing bass lines, because bass lines are primarily rhythm focused elements, right? So I've got this sort of square wave tone. Maybe I could just sort of play around here. I've got these drums as well. Maybe something like this. And then like a double here. I might just make all of these notes a little bit shorter as well. And make this one even shorter. And then that's kind of a nice rhythm. And then maybe I could just make a slight variation to the rhythm over here. So this rhythm is super simple. I'm just kind of repeating the same note distance of like a dotted eighth note over and over with a slight little variation in there. And now we can sort of just pitch it up and down according to maybe a scale or just according to your ear. So I'm just gonna sort of play around with these ones, right? Maybe something like this. And then bring the velocity down on this one. And then I could even take these notes out and then maybe bring this one down. I'm just going to pull the frequency down and duplicate this over again, maybe make some more sort of slight variations. So just starting particularly just with the rhythm first and then doing the melodic things later on is another really cool way of working, especially for bass lines. All right, so our next one you might be familiar before if you've watched some of my stuff in the past, and that is gate triggering. I always am such a big advocate for gate triggering. I just love it. It's so fun to do and experimental and creative. And you can make some really cool melodies by doing this. What we're essentially doing is I've got this sort of like music loop here. And you kind of want something with a bit of a progression if you're trying to make a melody. And what I'm going to do is just enable this gate device and then go expand it and use the sidechain and sidechain it from just any audio track that you set up. So this is going to be 8 audio. And then I like to use things like percussion loops, bongos and congas. And I'm just going to drag this in here and just have a look. So this audio here is going to be triggering this. The peaks of this audio here is going to be triggering this to actually play and stop. So, right? I can use this this release here. I can sort of edit this as well. Something like this, right? And then I could sort of play with some delay here, maybe. Maybe I could sort of edit some spots in here as well. So we're creating a really interesting melody, which is really the result of combining the rhythm from this track with the melodic information from this track. And you can just keep experimenting with this and just throwing in different audio tracks until you hit something that you like. The last one today is a lot of fun, and it's using visual inspiration. So like footage that you can just drag into the DAW, like these clouds that I have here. And just using this as a little bit of inspiration to create melodies. This is just something that really challenges me to think differently about the melodies that I'm making, dependent on the context of the footage here. So let's give this a crack and see what happens. I think maybe I'll just put it onto scale mode just to give me some reference, and then maybe I can put some notes in, but I'm thinking that I might just turn the grid off. So Command 4 to turn the grid off, and then just sort of play around with kind of like overlapping them randomly. Just see what happens. This little trill here. Maybe something a bit quicker than that. And then I'm going to turn the grid back on and then plug in some notes. Maybe something like this. Let's get a metronome on here. So I've just copied this patch over. I'm just going to put a few lower notes in as well. Maybe something like this. So it's just the inspiration here from this visual footage, which has just made me try something completely new and different, right? So that's it, your 10 different ways of creating melodies. But really what I'm trying to exemplify in this video is that there are endless, limitless different ways of creating melodies. And this is just a starting point as well. So we can create melodies and use these techniques, and that's all well and good. To make these melodies work in your track, you have to adapt them to the context of your song. That's what makes a really good melody stand out from an average one. So I hope you've enjoyed the video today. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel as always. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.